Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now today, I'm going to expand my horizons a bit. Typically, my response videos are directly responding to arguments for the truth of some kind of religion or deity, or against the idea of atheism. Today is going to be a smidgen different. I'm going to expand on the bonus from last week. I'm going to show an example of framing. A few months ago, I was challenged by someone in my comments section to respond to better Catholic content, as apparently I was responding to some lower tier content in the commenter's eyes. He gave me a list of 3 names, one of which I had already made a response to. I took the challenge and addressed another name on the list, a channel called Iron Inquisitor, and the commenter has been quiet ever since, which is okay. No shade to them. Well, apparently, that caused my YouTube's algorithm, all hail the mighty algorithm, to suggest another one of Iron Inquisitor's videos. Since he's supposedly one of the better content creators, I figured I'd check it out. I will admit, what got me was the title and the thumbnail, so whoever does his marketing is clearly doing it right. The video is titled, I attended a progressive, in quotes, Catholic convention. Now, I'm not sure what he means by the quotation marks. Is he saying it wasn't progressive? Or is he mocking the idea of progressiveness in the Catholic sphere? I don't know. I haven't watched the video yet. So let's check out what Iron Inquisitor thinks about the progressive Catholic convention.
Only heaven silent for an answer.
In 2024, I attended one of the most progressive Catholic conferences in the world, and what I saw blew my mind. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my perspective as a lay 25-year-old Catholic man. So first, what is it and how did I end up here? So I got a text out of the blue from our parish director. She's like, yo, there's this big event called a religious education conference coming up. Basically, a ton of Catholic educators from all across the world gather to talk about their faith, discuss strategies for evangelization, and the parish is sponsoring us. Translation, a 3-day, fully paid vacation. I'm down.
To his credit, the tone here isn't smug or sarcastic, thankfully. That's already a cut above a lot of online apologetics. And if a church wants to sponsor someone to attend an educational conference and no one's being hurt in the process, then honestly, I'm down. I've got no quarrel with that.
Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, sir? No, sir.
But calling it a 3-day fully paid vacation? Come on. I've been to plenty of conferences and conventions, and if you're actually there to learn, calling it a vacation is like calling a tax seminar a beach day. You attend talks, some of which are real snoozers. You take notes. You try to make connections. You walk until your feet protest. And if you're invested in what you're doing, whether it's education, outreach, or content creation, you spend your own money on tools, books, and materials to keep learning. So when someone jokes about being sponsored like it's a getaway, it feels like they're not taking the opportunity seriously, especially when a lot of us take this kind of environment as a chance to push ourselves and grow.
So when you sign up, you get to choose which talks you want to attend. So of course, I chose the most controversial ones. By controversial, I mean widely debated in the Catholic Church.
So here he's making the choice to attend the most controversial talks. That tells me everything. Not the most insightful, not the most useful, but the ones guaranteed to stir the pot. Look, if you're genuinely curious about the ideas that challenge you, great. But if you're filtering talks by controversy, you're not attending to learn, you're attending to react. He's not there to make a theological inquiry, but rather it looks like he's more focused on his content strategy. But okay, maybe they are the most interesting ones, and he's less likely to fall asleep. But I am skeptical. Let's keep going.
I had no idea what to expect. Here's how it went. So the first talk that stuck out to me was by Sister Carol Dempsey, PhD, a theology professor at the Catholic University of Portland, author of 18 books, vice president of the Catholic Biblical Association of America, really accomplished, you get the idea. So her talk was about how the Old Testament can make God seem really violent when he's actually very merciful and loving.
Okay, I wanted to go into this without responding to the points in the conference itself, but I suppose that's no longer the plan. I'll try to stick to his points as much as I can, but I can't not talk about this. No plain reading of the Old Testament would make anyone honestly reading it believe the God of the Old Testament, the storm god Yahweh, who is described as the deity of weather and war, who marches into battle commanding a heavenly army and defeating enemies, is simply misunderstood and just seems violent when he's actually merciful and loving. You can find passages where there may be merciful and or loving actions this God supposedly does, but overall, I don't see it. I actually went on an ADHD field dive into the idea of the storm god Yahweh and why it became the main god, and what about all the other gods that were worshipped at the time, and a bunch of other stuff. But you all don't need to see all of that, as this isn't a video about that, so I'll move on.
A few notes. So she suggested that the Catholic Church should reconsider its stance on same-sex marriage. And then she said something along the lines of using the word Lord in the Bible to refer to God can be interpreted as misogynistic, because the term Lord dates back to the medieval feudalism age in which the Lord, a male, would rule over the serfs. So we have to decolonize our minds. She also suggested we're in the earth because of global warming. Yeah.
Alright, Sister Carol Dempsey suggests that the church reevaluate how it frames concepts like divine authority, including calling Mr. Jesus Lord. Now, calling someone Lord is pretty consistent with the whole King of Kings idea, so it's not like that title just came out of nowhere. But suggesting that we reflect on the implications of that language isn't really theological hearsay, it's theology in motion. Catholic thinkers have done this for centuries. Ever heard of Vatican II? As for the Earth comment, he censors her by saying we're effing the Earth due to climate change. Now, yeah, that's blunt language. Maybe not what you'd expect from a nun, but let's be real. If climate change is as catastrophic as the data says it is, and the data says it very much is, then a little fire in the tone might be warranted. Though I may be giving this sister too much credit, and may just be him taking liberties with what was being said. What's more telling is his response. Yeah. That's nothing but dismissal. It waves off the scientific consensus. NASA, the IPCC, AMS, like it's all just political noise. But this isn't a fringe opinion. 97% of climate scientists agree humans are driving climate change. So when someone in the church connects theology to environmental ethics, maybe don't roll your eyes. Maybe ask why it took this long. Her talk represents the church grappling with modern realities. His response suggests it shouldn't. His clear dismissal is him insulating dogma from the world it's supposed to serve. And I'll tell you, I don't really much care for that attitude, young man.
The next talk was by a gentleman by the name of Mr. John Allen. He's an editor at the Catholic news website Crux, or The Crux, Cruz? Something Crux. He's basically a news reporter for the Vatican. His talk was about Pope Francis's papacy, which I found super informative because it's hard to decipher what's really going on with Pope Francis. He'll say something off the cuff, getting off an airplane in Italian, and all of a sudden the press is translating it 5 different times, taking it out of context. So it's like, what's actually happening in the Vatican? I found his talk so informative, I signed up for another talk of his later that weekend. During the Q&A section, I did find it interesting that much of the audience, mostly boomers, kept asking about wanting female deacons.
He seems oddly surprised that boomers at a progressive Catholic convention are the ones asking about female deacons. Why is that a surprise, aye? To me, it sounds like a confirmation. Of course, progressive Catholics are gonna have progressive concerns. That's like going to Comic-Con and being shocked when someone's wearing a cape. But here's the part that undermines his framing. Older Catholics pushing for female deacons doesn't weaken the case. I think it actually strengthens it. These are people who have been inside the church, playing by its rules, likely for decades. They've seen the theology evolve. They've lived through Vatican II, and they're still here asking for a change the church has been punting on for far too long. This isn't some recent youth overreach. It's a long simmering issue now boiling over. So the real takeaway isn't why are older people asking about this? It's why is the church still dragging its feet? Okay, Zoomer.
The third talk was by a gentleman by the name of Chris De Silva, and his talk was about how we can improve outreach with LGBT Catholics who often feel alienated. Mr. De Silva is a campus minister at the Catholic Loyola Marymount University, and he's in a relationship himself.
Notice how he didn't say same-sex relationship, just relationship, even though he showed a picture of Chris De Silva and presumably his partner. Someone listening without watching might be able to infer through context, but it wouldn't be entirely clear, and I think it's worth calling out by erasure when I see it. I'm not saying he left that part out on purpose, but it does strike me as a little odd. If Silva were in a heterosexual relationship, would this even be mentioned? Well, probably not. And if he were single, well, I doubt it'd come up at all. But maybe I'm nitpicking, but I still think it's worth pointing out.
During his talk, he had Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and atheist students share their story. In his slide deck, they're talking about pronouns, being non-binary and Catholic. I also have to say, Mr. De Silva has an angelic voice. I'm not much of a singer, but he got me singing along. The dude is really gifted.
Naturally, a progressive Catholic convention includes talks on LGBTQIA+ outreach. I mean, were we expecting a Tridentine Latin Mass and a papal bull on the evils of TikTok? Come on. The existence of this topic with progressive Catholics shouldn't be news. The real story is that these sessions even need to exist, because LGBTQIA+ Catholics are Catholic, and many have been pushed to the margins of their own faith communities. And while I don't share the theological views, I absolutely believe their communities should accept them as full human beings. You don't need to share someone's dogma to recognize their dignity. If someone believes in their Mr. Jesus, wants to be part of the church, and is seeking meaning and belonging within that framework, why slam the door in their face? Even by conservative Christian standards, this shouldn't be controversial. After all, if sin is universal, as in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, then singling out gay people makes no theological sense. Why is their sin treated as a scarlet letter while everyone else gets grace and potlucks? To his credit, Iron Inquisitor here keeps a calm, respectful tone throughout this segment. There's no mockery or moralizing, just straightforward reporting. And his comment about the speaker's angelic voice, honestly, it seemed genuine. That's a moment of grace. More of that would be welcome.
And last but not least, Father James Martin. To be honest, I was bracing for this talk because I know he's quite controversial. But to be honest, his talk was way more mellow than I thought. He spoke about the historicity and life of Lazarus and how we can apply lessons from him into our own life. And I have to say, Father James Martin is a really nice guy in person. Like, whatever you think about him, when I went up to shake his hand, I can see why he's so popular. Father has charisma. He makes you feel good. Later that day, one of my fellow catechists told me he went to another talk of his. I personally wasn't there, but apparently he stood in line and asked Father James Martin a question on the topic of LGBT because that's his specialty. And according to him, Father kind of dodged the question. So then his friend stood in line, asked a follow-up, and then he stood in line again to ask another follow-up, and then they ended the Q&A session.
I have no reason to doubt, and I'm glad that Friar James Martin at least comes off as a kind person. And yes, he speaks well. With his experience, this isn't a surprise. Public speakers are supposed to be charismatic. But being personable and being right aren't the same thing, especially in public religious discourse. Now, there's a question displayed on screen that seems to be what he's responding to, though it's not said out loud. It reads, "Considering all the outreach you do, at what point do we call those who live outside the church's teaching to a life of chastity? I agree we must be charitable, but we must also tell them to repent, yes?" Now let's not sugarcoat it. This is a loaded question. It presumes its own moral conclusion, that any deviation from the church's sexual ethics is a sin in need of repentance. And while it claims to be charitable, it does so while implicitly targeting LGBTQIA+ people under the guise of doctrine. We've seen this tactic before. Friar Martin's alleged response is shown on screen as well as, "They should come on their own." No, not that way. But it also explicitly says, not an actual quote. But that's a problem. If your entire point is that he evaded a critical question, but you don't provide his real words, how are we supposed to assess whether he evaded anything at all? And then there's mention of a follow-up and another follow-up. But again, no video, no transcript, nothing. That's like accusing someone of dodging a question while refusing to replay the tape. To be fair, his tone is mostly neutral, which is fine, but neutrality without transparency doesn't get you points, it just raises more questions. If you're going to claim someone dodged, you need receipts. Otherwise, you're just filling in blanks with your own assumptions. And frankly, that doesn't feel like faithful reporting. That sounds like narrative control.
Later that evening, we all got into the stadium where Cardinal McElroy, Bishop of San Diego, also big on inclusion, offered mass. They had a squad of exclusively female altar servers. They had this whole ceremony folding out a rainbow tapestry. They had this bowl of incense instead of the normal swingy thing. There was also liturgical dancing, which I've never seen before. After mass, I told our director, like, where can I sign up for this? I want to be dancing at our home parish too. Oh, and there's also this woman kneeling in front of everyone. I don't know what this was for.
So, at a progressive Catholic convention, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was advertised as inclusive. What he was surprised by was inclusion? While he keeps an even tone, his wording here makes it sound like he witnessed a pagan fertility rite. Women as altar servers, dancers at mass, incense in a bowl instead of a swingy thurible. Yes, it's called a thurible. And even a rainbow tapestry. Oh no, color! But here's the thing, none of this violates Catholic teaching. Female altar servers? Permitted since 1994. Liturgical dancing? Allowed in many cultural contexts, especially outside of the West. Pope St. John Paul II even praised it when done reverently. Bowl incense? That's just aesthetics. Swing or no swing, it's still incense. Rainbow cloth? Last I checked, wasn't there a big argument that God used rainbows first and the alphabet mafia stole it? So where's the theological error? There isn't one. Just vibes. Aesthetic preferences are being pointed out like there's some kind of moral violations. It's like being offended that someone wore sneakers to a cathedral. Annoying to the traditionalist, but not doctrinally problematic. And if there's an actual point to be made, he hasn't made it yet. What we're left with is performative pearl clutching that pretends incense bowls are dogma. And look, I get it. Some people like their religion with more incense and fewer women. But if your biggest issue from a mass is the shape of the incense holder, maybe it's not the church that needs to modernize. Maybe it's your sense of perspective. Though, maybe I'm being too hard on him. To be fair, he did seem on board with the dancing. But the fact that he has never seen it before leads me to believe that he's part of a very old-school traditionalist church. Maybe this is good. Maybe this will broaden his horizons as well.
They also had this big expo where a bunch of different ministries were giving out flyers, brochures, merch, and there was one booth in particular that caught my eye called Catholic Women Preach. I went up to their booth and talked to the guy, very unassuming, just asking for more info, and the gentleman there seemed a bit defensive or standoffish. I don't know, maybe it was just me, but yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, every Sunday, you can listen to videos of women preaching the gospel.
So a booth titled Catholic Women Preach caught your eye, and not because of its content, but seemingly because of its existence? Why did it catch your eye, I? That just raises the question. Why does the idea of women preaching still strike you as noteworthy? Because in many Christian denominations, Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, UCC, and more, it's Sunday as usual. Nothing subversive, nothing shocking. At this point, it's starting to feel like women simply existing in visible or leadership roles in the church is something he considers odd or vaguely suspicious. The shock here is yours. And framing it as an oddity, or describing the man at the booth as defensive while you claim to be just asking questions for more info, is a rhetorical sleight of hand. It subtly paints advocacy for women's voices as reactive or suspicious while portraying yourself as neutral. But let's be honest, if you're part of a tradition where women preaching is controversial, then yes, people representing that movement may seem guarded. Because for centuries, women have been told they don't belong at the pulpit. Not because of ability, not because of calling, but because of plumbing and Paul. So someone gets a bit tense when defending the radical notion that they're allowed to speak? I don't think that's being defensive. It's more likely fatigue. And if that still seems odd to you, the issue isn't with the booth, it's with the blinders. The whole section implies that women preaching is inherently unusual. But outside your bubble, it isn't. It only feels strange if you've already decided women's voices don't belong behind the pulpit. And that's not a universal truth. That's a very narrow theological hangup. After some more ADHD looking, I found an article from uscatholic.org about women in leadership roles. I'll post a link in the description for anyone interested. The article was from 2010, talking about the increasing number of women holding leadership positions in the church. So this really isn't a new thing. Maybe relatively it is. However, the article talks about Sharon Daly, Vice President for the Social Policy at Catholic Charities USA, who was a church leader in 1984. So the fact that this seems to be an oddity shows a level of ignorance for things that have been going on at least a decade and a half before he was born.
Now, you might notice that throughout this entire video, I have not mentioned what my personal opinion is on any of these events. At least not beyond something being interesting or informative. You see, I want to keep this video factual and let you, the viewer, make up your mind.
You say you've avoided giving your personal opinion. Now, I do my best to do that in all of my videos, unless I mention otherwise. So that sounds admirable on the surface, until we look at the content. Because while you've avoided explicit statements like, I believe X, your editorial framing gives away plenty. For example, you repeatedly highlight women doing, well, anything, as something curious or noteworthy. Why? If your video is just the facts, Then what makes singling out the presence of female preachers even worth a mention? Then there's Friar James Martin. You framed his response as dodging a question. That's not a neutral summary, that's your interpretation. Likewise, calling Chris De Silva's voice angelic isn't a data point, it's your taste. And your clear skepticism towards climate change, expressed without engaging in any scientific evidence, is another strong cue to your personal bias. Let's be real here. Trying to claim neutrality while steering your audience through subtle cues is like saying you didn't touch the steering wheel while nudging it with your elbow the whole time. It's still a direction.
In fact, I was very hesitant to make this video. I prayed on it, and ultimately, I think it's very important that we as Catholics experience both sides of the church, liberal and conservative. Don't get me wrong, I love the Latin Mass, guardrails, communion on the tongue, but you have to keep in mind, this side of the church, this conference, is technically in good standing in the eyes of the diocese, the Vatican.
Technically, that word carries a lot of baggage, and it's the kind of qualifier you use when something is true, but you wish it weren't. Like saying Pluto is technically not a planet anymore. He admits the church has approved this ministry, but he's telegraphing discomfort. It's as if he's inviting the audience to distrust the church's own judgment without having to say it out loud. This is a rhetorical move, not just a description. He's presenting a church-approved event led by church-approved educators, yet casting it in a tone of mild alarm. And when he's saying he and his co-instructors are just simple Catholics who appreciate Orthodox teaching, he's not being neutral. That's coded language. It implies that anything outside of his interpretation of Orthodoxy is suspect, especially if it involves LGBTQIA+ inclusion or women preaching. So let's be honest, this isn't an objective report. It's a carefully curated vibe of suspicion towards progressive Catholics, even while maintaining the presence of neutrality. He's walking the line, expressing disapproval without ever committing to a direct claim. But that's not intellectual honesty, that's plausible deniability wrapped in piety.
And these are the teachers, ministers, admins, principals, the leaders of the Catholic education scene in the United States. Leaving my co-instructors and I, who, full transparency, I don't like to put people in boxes, but I'd say we're pretty moderate. We're just simple Catholics who appreciate Orthodox teaching, and we were quite intrigued, to say the least.
Like the bartender said to the bear, why the big pause? This is like saying, I, as an atheist, find this video really interesting, to say the least. Iron Inquisitor is a really interesting person, bless his heart. We all know what that pause means. It's not curiosity, it's condescension wrapped in plausible deniability. And that's the end of his video. So I cut out his call for comments, but I'll leave a link to the video in the description so you all know I didn't leave anything out or do any dishonest editing. So now, he didn't really make any points per se, so there's nothing to wrap up. But what do you think? Do you think Iron Inquisitor went into this with an open mind and an honest heart? Or do you think he really thought of it as a vacation and a chance to slack off from, I don't know, whatever rules he has to follow as a moderate Catholic? Let me know in the comments below. Overall, I give Iron Inquisitor an 8 facepalming Virgin Marys out of 10. He uses loaded language and humor, swingy thing, to mock without explicitly engaging. He claims to be neutral and lets viewers decide, but spends the whole time using tone, framing, and selective incredulity to undermine progressive positions. He avoids actual engagement with the ideas presented. Even if he wanted to keep his opinion out of the video, he doesn't ask, why are people pushing for female deacons? Why is LGBTQIA+ inclusion seen as important in a Catholic context? He ends by positioning himself as a simple Catholic who likes tradition, thus subtly contrasting the normal against the weird progressives, without having to own a position. He reports others, e.g. a friend who says Friar Martin dodged a question, secondhand, adding layers of plausible deniability. By pretending neutrality while obviously implying critique, he's not being honest about his rhetorical intent. Iron Inquisitor here presents himself as a moderate observer, but what he's really doing is soft tribal signaling to traditional Catholics. He never offers clear arguments, but the implications of disapproval are thick. With as many subs and views as he has, this sort of content spreads ideas while evading responsibility for having clear ones. That's it for this one. So now, what do you think? Do you think I showed the outright problem with framing? Or do you think his talk was too high for me to get, like a dog whistle? To a dog. Humans can't hear it. You get it. Let me know in the comments below. Speaking of framing, You can set this video up next to your other liked videos by hitting that like button. Though with so many of them on your list, it probably won't stand out so much, so you can make sure you can get my newest videos delivered straight to your YouTubes by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Speaking of framed people, I need to give an ornate thanks to my patrons, especially Clanimus, Anima, and Sora, who are the masterpieces that make up the gallery that is my channel. Just look at them up there, all shiny. But if you would like to be woody with intricate designs, you can join them for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. Thank you to all of you who help get this content to more eyes. The channel is slowly but steadily growing, and I hope to increase my reach with new eyes every week. It's a lot, but all of you that help, I mean it, thank you. And as an extra thank you, here's a little bonus. A couple weeks ago, I talked about framing, specifically the debate between Cliff Knechtley and Alex O'Connor, where Cliff was framing his question in a way to try to trap Alex in a certain way of thinking. This week, I want to talk about framing again from a different perspective. Very briefly, framing is when someone presents information in a way that nudges you towards a certain reaction before you've had a chance to think critically about it. It's not about what's being said, it's about how it's being packaged. And there's a ton of framing in Iron Inquisitor's video here. Framing that heavily guides the viewer towards emotional and ideological conclusions before any real argument is made. In the video with Cliff, he was using debate question framing, rhetorical framing, or loaded framing. This is where someone frames a question or argument in a way that embeds assumptions or directs the burden of proof unfairly. It's common in debates and apologetics. But did you catch any framing from Iron Inquisitor? Well, he was using narrative or expository framing, also contextual framing or interpretive framing. This is where someone presents a story, claim, or description with subtle cues that shape how you interpret what you're seeing, even when it seems like a neutral retelling. In the Iron Inquisitor video, for instance, he's not asking questions. He's describing what happened. But in doing so, he's choosing what to include, what to omit, and what tone or language to use, which directs your interpretation. This is more insidious because it feels like pure reporting, but it isn't. Let's take a look at some examples. He starts by pointing out the booth called Catholic Women Preach and says it caught his eye. That's not neutral, that's coded language. It subtly suggests this isn't normal, this isn't right. This primes the audience to share his skepticism before evaluating the actual content of the booth. He never says it outright, but he doesn't have to. The framing does the heavy lifting. He claims the guy at the booth was defensive or standoffish, but even he admits he might be misreading that. So why include it? Because it sets a tone. These people are uneasy. Maybe they're hiding something. Maybe the guy at the booth agreed with what is being heavily implied and is uncomfortable promoting women leading the church. It plants a seed of distrust in the viewer's mind without evidence. It's not an argument, that's a narrative frame, designed to color your perception before any facts are on the table. Throughout the video, he treats women in leadership or theological roles like they're a shocking departure from the norm. But ask yourself, is he arguing why this is wrong, or is he just presenting it as weird, out of place, wrong by assumption? That's framing again. He doesn't need to convince you. It's all about how he cues you to feel. This is how framing works. It bypasses your critical thinking by creating a narrative where the conclusion is already baked in. He doesn't have to say, these women and everyone who supports this idea are wrong. He just shows them to you like there's some theological glitch in the matrix. That's a cultural frame, and one's designed to make egalitarian ideals feel uncomfortable or intrusive. It's subtle, it's effective, and it's not the same thing as making a case. So let's take a look at how to spot this kind of framing and what to do about it. First, watch for certainty in description. When someone describes what happened, ask, is this the only way to interpret that moment? When the narrator says someone shut down, look at the footage. Do they really? Or is it a pause, a breath, a sidestep? Second, look for selective cuts or emphasis. If they never show the opponent's full answer, or they jump cut reactions to look one-sided, that's framing. Third, listen for groupthink phrases. Phrases like, we all know, or everyone could see, or clearly the truth is. These are often ways to pressure agreement rather than earn it. But if you're suspicious, for 4, ask who benefits from the story being true. Good critical thinking starts by examining the motives behind a presentation. Even if you agree with the speaker, ask, what aren't they showing? Framing isn't just how you ask a question, it's how you tell a story. And when that story skips key context or claims a victory before you've seen the full picture, it's not analysis, it's choreography. So don't just ask what's being said, ask how it's being shown. That's where the real persuasion happens, and that's where critical thinking begins. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of the video. I hope you all are getting something from these little bonuses. It's tricky to spot when you're in the situation, but with a little study and practice, you'll be spotting framing like a pro. So keep practicing in the comments, in the Discord, wherever you practice. Keep asking questions if you aren't sure because the framing sounds weird. And as always, keep learning.
So that's why my religion